On his 20th birthday, Jake expected nothing more than a small family dinner. But instead, he received the keys to a forgotten horse farm abandoned for over 30 years. Everyone in town warned him to stay away from the property. They said strange things happened there after his grandfather mysteriously disappeared. The fences were broken, the stables were falling apart, and the entire ranch looked completely dead. Until Jake noticed one thing that didn't make sense: a single barn door secured with a heavy rusted chain. No one had opened it in decades. At first, he thought it was just an old storage barn. But the moment he forced the lock open, a terrifying sound echoed from inside the darkness, and what he discovered standing there left the entire town shocked. Because hidden inside that abandoned barn was a secret his family had buried for years, and a horse nobody believed was still alive. Jake Turner never cared much about birthdays. To him, they were just another day marked by cheap cake, a few text messages, and long hours at work. But his 20th birthday began differently. Rain fell softly over the small town of Ash Creek as Jake sat alone inside his tiny rented house near the edge of town. An old clock ticked loudly on the kitchen wall while he stared at a cold cup of coffee. He had planned to spend the day quietly before heading to his evening shift at the repair garage. Then someone knocked on the door. Jake opened it and found a tall man in a dark suit standing under the rain with a leather briefcase in his hand. "Jake Turner?" the stranger asked. "Yeah. My name is Daniel Reeves. I am the attorney handling your grandfather's estate." Jake froze for a moment. "My grandfather?" The man nodded calmly. "May I come in?" A few minutes later, Daniel sat across from Jake at the kitchen table. He carefully removed several papers from his briefcase and placed them in front of him. "Your grandfather left you his property." Jake looked confused. "What property?" "Black Hollow Farm." The room suddenly felt colder. Jake had not heard that name spoken in years. Black Hollow Farm once belonged to his grandfather, Walter Turner. Long ago it had been the pride of Ash Creek. The ranch was famous for raising strong horses that attracted buyers from across the country. People used to speak proudly about the Turner family. Then Walter vanished without explanation. After that, the ranch slowly died. Jake remembered hearing whispers when he was younger. Some people claimed Walter ran away. Others believed he had been murdered. No one ever knew the truth. His father refused to discuss it. Over time, Black Hollow Farm became something people avoided talking about. "You are telling me I own the farm now?" Jake asked quietly. Daniel nodded. "Along with all buildings and land connected to it." Jake gave a short laugh in disbelief. "That place has been abandoned for years." "There is one condition," Daniel said. He reached into his pocket and placed an old brass key on the table. "Your grandfather requested that you open a locked barn located on the property before making any decisions about selling the farm." Jake stared at the rusted key. "A locked barn. That is all he wrote." The rain outside grew heavier. For reasons he could not explain, Jake felt uneasy looking at the key. It seemed older than everything else in the room, worn smooth by time and use. Later that afternoon, Jake drove toward Black Hollow Farm. The long dirt road leading there was nearly hidden beneath tall grass and mud. Broken fence posts leaned sideways along the fields. The closer he got, the quieter the world became. When the ranch finally appeared through the rain, Jake slowed the truck. The farmhouse looked empty and tired. Windows were cracked. Paint peeled from the walls. Old barns stood like dark skeletons against the gray sky. Then Jake noticed one building standing far behind the others. A massive black barn. Unlike the rest of the ranch, its doors were tightly sealed with thick chains. Jake stepped out into the cold rain and slowly walked toward it. As he reached the entrance, he heard something move inside. Then came the sound that made his blood run cold. A horse breathing in the darkness. Jake stood frozen in front of the black barn while rain dripped from the edge of the roof onto the muddy ground below. His heart beat harder with every second. He listened carefully, trying to convince himself that the sound inside was only the wind moving through old wood. But then he heard it again. A slow breath. Heavy. Alive. Jake looked down at the rusted chain wrapped around the barn doors. The metal was thick with age, darkened by years of rain and dust. At the center hung a large lock. His grandfather's key suddenly felt heavier in his pocket. For a long moment, Jake considered walking away. Nothing about the place felt normal. The ranch looked abandoned, yet something inside this barn had survived all these years. He slowly pulled the key from his pocket and pushed it into the lock. At first it would not move. Jake twisted harder. A loud click echoed through the quiet ranch. The lock fell open. Jake swallowed nervously as he removed the chain and let it drop into the mud. The sound seemed to wake the entire property. Somewhere nearby, loose metal creaked in the wind. He grabbed the barn handles and pushed. The doors moved only a few inches before sticking against the floor. Dust burst into the air. Jake pushed harder until a narrow opening appeared wide enough for him to slip through. Darkness filled the barn completely. The smell hit him first. Old hay, wet wood, animal sweat. Jake pulled out his flashlight and aimed it into the shadows. Thick dust floated through the beam of light. Broken tools and empty stalls lined the walls. Then the beam stopped moving. Two eyes stared back at him from the far end of the barn. Jake nearly dropped the flashlight. The animal slowly stepped forward. It was a horse. A huge black stallion with a long tangled mane and powerful shoulders. Dirt covered its body, but beneath the filth Jake could see strength unlike anything he had ever seen before. Old scars crossed its skin. A heavy chain hung loosely from one back leg. The horse stared directly at him without fear. Jake could barely believe what he was seeing. "No way," he whispered. The stallion lowered its head slightly and took another slow step forward. Its muscles shifted beneath its dark coat like moving shadows. "How are you alive?" The horse suddenly slammed its hoof against the wooden floor with such force that Jake jumped backward. Dust shook loose from the ceiling. Despite the animal's size, Jake noticed something strange in its eyes. Pain. Loneliness. The horse looked less like a wild creature and more like something that had been waiting for a very long time. Jake slowly moved farther into the barn while keeping his distance. The flashlight revealed old shelves, empty feed bags, and faded blankets hanging from hooks. Then he noticed the walls. Newspaper clippings covered nearly every surface. Some were yellow with age, while others looked newer. Jake walked closer and began reading the headlines. Local horse breeder disappears. Farm worker missing after night shift. Unknown buyers linked to illegal sales. Jake frowned. Photographs were pinned beside the articles. Most showed his grandfather standing beside horses at competitions years ago. In several pictures, the same black stallion stood next to him. The horse had not changed. At the center of the barn sat an old wooden desk covered in dust. Jake opened the top drawer carefully. Inside rested a thick leather journal. Walter Turner. Jake recognized his grandfather's handwriting immediately. He opened the first page slowly. "If you are reading this, it means you finally opened the barn." Jake felt a chill move through his chest. The next sentence made his stomach tighten even more. "There are people who will come looking for the horse. Do not trust them." Before Jake could continue reading, a sudden sound came from outside. Tires crunching on gravel. Headlights swept across the cracks in the barn walls. Someone was driving onto the property. The black stallion lifted its head sharply and let out a deep warning sound from its throat. Jake closed the journal instantly as voices echoed outside in the rain. Jake quickly shut the journal and turned off his flashlight. Darkness swallowed the barn again except for thin lines of light slipping through the cracks in the walls. Outside, truck doors slammed shut. More than one vehicle had arrived. The black stallion stepped backward into the shadows, almost disappearing into the darkness as if it understood danger had come. Jake held his breath. Heavy boots moved across the wet ground outside the barn. Low voices carried through the rain, calm and confident. Then someone knocked slowly against the barn door. Not a friendly knock. A warning. Jake remained still. The voice that followed sounded deep and controlled. "You can come out now, son." Jake felt tension rise in his chest. Somehow these people already knew someone was inside. Another voice spoke quietly outside. "The chain is gone." A long silence followed. Jake glanced toward the horse. The stallion stood perfectly still, ears raised toward the door. Then the first man spoke again. "We are not here to hurt you. Jake did not believe that for a second. He slowly moved toward the entrance and pushed one barn door open slightly. Rain blew inside immediately. 3 black trucks stood near the farmhouse with their headlights pointed toward the barn. Several men waited beside them wearing dark jackets and heavy boots. The man standing closest to the door looked around 60 years old with gray hair and sharp eyes. Unlike the others, he looked calm. His gaze moved past Jake for one brief second toward the darkness inside the barn. A faint smile crossed his face. "So it is true," the man said softly. "The horse survived." Jake tightened his grip on the door. "Who are you?" The man stepped forward carefully. "My name is Victor Kane. I knew your grandfather many years ago." Jake said nothing. Victor studied him for a moment before speaking again. "You must be Walter's grandson. How do you know my grandfather?" Victor ignored the question. "When we heard someone finally visited the property, we came as quickly as possible." Jake immediately noticed the way the other men watched the barn. None of them looked surprised about the horse, almost like they had been expecting this moment for years. Victor glanced toward the darkness again. "He was always a beautiful animal." Jake frowned. "You know about the horse?" Victor smiled slightly. "Know about him? We searched for him a very long time." The rain continued falling around them while thunder rolled somewhere far away. Jake remembered the words written inside the journal. "Do not trust them." Victor slowly removed a pair of gloves from his hands. "Your grandfather made a mistake many years ago," he said calmly. "One that caused problems for many people." Jake felt anger rising inside him. "My grandfather disappeared." Victor lowered his eyes briefly. "Yes, a tragedy." Something about the way he said it felt empty and cold. Jake took one step outside the barn. "What do you want?" Victor answered immediately. "The horse." The men behind him remained silent, but Jake noticed several of them carefully adjusting their jackets. Something hard pressed beneath the fabric near their waists. "Weapons." Jake's stomach tightened. "The horse is not for sale," he said firmly. Victor gave a small laugh. "You do not even know what you inherited." "I know enough." The older man's expression slowly changed. The polite smile disappeared from his face. "That animal is worth more money than you can imagine," Victor said quietly. "Your grandfather understood that. Then why did he hide him?" Victor stared at Jake for several seconds before answering. "Because Walter stopped thinking clearly near the end." Inside the barn, the black stallion suddenly struck the floor hard with its hoof. The loud crack echoed through the storm. Several men stepped backward instinctively. Victor glanced toward the sound with visible irritation. "He still remembers us," he muttered. Jake heard that clearly. A cold feeling spread through him. These men had been here before. Victor looked back at Jake. "I will make this simple. Hand over the horse, and you walk away wealthy." Jake shook his head immediately. "No." Silence filled the rain-soaked ranch. Victor slowly nodded as though he expected the answer. "You are stubborn," he said softly. "Just like your grandfather." He turned and walked back toward the trucks. Before climbing inside, he looked at Jake one final time. "We will return tomorrow," he said. "Think carefully before then." The engines started moments later. Jake stood in the rain watching the trucks disappear down the long dirt road. Behind him, deep inside the barn, the black stallion let out a low, uneasy breath. Jake did not sleep that night. The old farmhouse felt cold and restless after Victor Kane left the property. Rain continued tapping against the windows while tree branches scraped softly across the roof outside. Every sound made Jake more uneasy. He sat at the kitchen table with his grandfather's journal open in front of him. Most of the pages were filled with notes about the black stallion. Walter had written about the horse almost like family, not property. There were records of races, training routines, feeding schedules, and long personal entries describing the animal's intelligence. But as the journal continued, the writing changed. The entries became shorter, more nervous. Walter wrote about men arriving at the ranch late at night demanding meetings. He mentioned threats, missing workers, and strangers following him through town. One sentence appeared several times across different pages. "They will never stop hunting him." Jake rubbed his tired eyes and turned another page. A folded photograph slipped out and landed on the table. Jake picked it up slowly. The picture showed a younger Walter standing beside the black stallion many years earlier. Both looked proud and strong. Written across the back in faded ink were 4 simple words. "His name is Midnight." Jake stared at the photograph quietly. The horse was not just hidden away inside that barn. Walter had protected him for a reason. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed outside. Jake jumped from his chair. It came again. A heavy thud from somewhere near the barn. Jake grabbed a flashlight and hurried outside into the cold night air. Rain had finally stopped, but dark clouds still covered the sky. Mud pulled at his boots as he crossed the ranch. Another loud sound came from inside the barn. Jake quickly opened the door. Midnight stood near the back wall, breathing heavily. The horse appeared agitated, stomping repeatedly against the wooden floor. "What is it?" Jake asked softly. Midnight struck the ground again. Jake raised the flashlight and noticed something strange beneath the horse's feet. One section of the floor looked newer than the rest, almost hidden beneath dirt and loose hay. Curious, Jake stepped closer and pushed aside the hay with his boot. Wooden edges appeared underneath. A hidden door. His heartbeat quickened. Jake knelt down and pulled hard against the small metal handle hidden in the floorboards. At first it would not move. Then slowly the wood lifted open with a deep creaking sound. Cold air rushed upward from below. A narrow staircase disappeared into darkness beneath the barn. Jake hesitated only a moment before climbing down carefully with the flashlight in hand. At the bottom he found a small underground room. Dust covered everything. Old shelves lined the walls filled with boxes and papers. A small table stood in one corner beside a rusty lamp. It looked like someone had once lived there in secret. Jake slowly walked deeper into the room. Then he noticed a tape recorder sitting beside several videotapes. One tape had his name written across it. Jake. His hands shook as he inserted the tape into the old machine and pressed play. Static filled the room for several seconds before the screen flickered to life. Walter Turner appeared sitting in front of the camera. Older, tired, afraid. He looked directly into the camera. "If you are watching this," Walter said quietly, "then they finally found the barn." Jake stared at the screen as his grandfather continued speaking. "Victor Kane is dangerous," Walter said weakly. "He wanted Midnight because the horse carries a bloodline worth millions. But that was never the real reason. Kane used horse auctions to hide criminal business for years. When I threatened to expose him, people started disappearing." Jake felt his chest tighten. Walter looked down for a moment before continuing. "I could not save everyone, but I could save Midnight." The video suddenly ended. Before Jake could move, the sound of engines roared outside once again. Victor had returned. Jake rushed upstairs from the hidden room and ran outside the barn. 3 black trucks were already crossing the ranch. Armed men stepped out quickly, spreading across the property. Victor walked slowly toward him through the darkness. "It is over, Jake," he called out calmly. Behind Jake, Midnight burst from the barn with a loud cry that echoed across the fields. The massive stallion charged forward like a storm. Without thinking, Jake grabbed the horse's mane and climbed onto his back. Gunshots rang out behind them as Midnight raced through the open fields under the dark sky. For the first time in years, Black Hollow Farm was no longer hiding its secret. And neither was Jake. Jake never expected that a simple birthday inheritance would uncover secrets buried for decades. What began as a visit to an abandoned horse farm became a fight for truth, survival, and the bond between a man and a forgotten animal. In the end, Midnight was never just a horse. He was the final piece of a story that powerful people tried desperately to erase. But some secrets refused to stay buried forever. If you enjoyed this emotional and suspenseful story, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more powerful horse stories, mystery dramas, and unforgettable adventures. Turn on notifications so you never miss another story filled with emotion, danger, and unexpected twists. Comment below. What would you have done if you discovered the locked barn and found Midnight inside? Share this story with your friends and family to spread the message about loyalty, courage, and the deep connection between humans and animals. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next story.